The screams cut through the roar of the waves. A tourist boat was sinking in San Diego harbor, and dozens of lives were hanging by a thread. What began as a sunny sightseeing tour quickly became a nightmare on the water. Tourists laughed and took photos until a sudden collision jolted the boat, tilting it hard to one side. Water rushed in, panic spread, and cries for help echoed across the harbor. Moments later, the call reached the San Diego Fire Rescue Department's Water Rescue Unit. From the sky, their helicopter roared toward the scene, divers ready to leap into the chaos below. If you believe stories of courage should be told, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because what happened next would test every ounce of training, courage, and determination these water rescue specialists had ever developed. The morning sun painted San Diego harbor in brilliant gold as the tour boat Pacific Explorer cut through the calm waters with 43 passengers aboard. Families pointed at sea lions basking on distant piers, couples snapped selfies against the downtown skyline, and children pressed their faces to the windows, mesmerized by the marine life below. Captain Rodriguez had been running harbor tours for 15 years. He knew these waters like the back of his hand. But what he didn't see coming was the speeding fishing vessel that had lost control near the shipping lanes. The captain of the smaller boat had suffered a medical emergency, leaving his craft running full throttle toward the crowded tourist area. By the time anyone noticed the runaway vessel, it was already too late. The impact came without warning. The fishing boat slammed into the Pacific Explorer's starboard side with a thunderous crash that sent passengers flying across the deck. The sound of splintering fiberglass mixed with the first screams of terror as the tour boat lurched violently to one side. Windows shattered, drinks spilled, and what had been a peaceful morning turned into chaos in a matter of seconds. Water immediately began pouring through the massive gash in the hull. The Pacific Explorer, designed for calm harbor tours, wasn't built to withstand such damage. As seawater flooded the lower decks, the boat began listing dangerously to starboard. Passengers who had been casually enjoying their tour now found themselves sliding toward the damaged side, grabbing onto railings and each other for support. Captain Rodriguez fought to maintain control as alarms blared throughout the vessel. His years of experience told him everything he needed to know. They had minutes, maybe less, before the Pacific Explorer would be completely underwater. The question wasn't if the boat would sink, but how many people he could save before it did. The deck of the Pacific Explorer had transformed into a scene of pure terror. Passengers who moments before had been taking leisurely photos were now clinging desperately to whatever they could find as the boat continued its relentless tilt toward the water. Families were separated in the chaos, children crying for parents, elderly passengers struggling to maintain their footing on the increasingly angled deck. A young mother named Sarah clutched her 6-year-old daughter Emma as they slid toward the damaged side of the boat. The girl's life jacket was tangled, and Sarah's hands shook as she tried to secure it properly while water splashed over the railings. Around them, other passengers fumbled with life preservers, some putting them on backwards in their panic, others unable to find them at all as the boat's emergency equipment scattered across the tilting deck. The crew members, trained for standard emergencies, found themselves overwhelmed by the severity of the situation. First Officer Martinez attempted to organize an evacuation, but his voice was barely audible over the sound of rushing water, grinding metal, and terrified screams. Passengers pushed and shoved, not out of malice, but from pure survival instinct, as the cold Pacific water began washing over the lower sections of the deck. An elderly man with a walking cane lost his footing and slid toward the edge, only to be caught by a teenage boy who grabbed his arm just in time. A group of college students formed a human chain, trying to help others reach higher ground on the boat, But there was nowhere to go. The entire vessel was sinking. The water was now knee-deep on the lower deck, and those who couldn't swim began to panic even more. Some passengers had already gone overboard, not by choice, but because they lost their grip as the boat lurched. Their heads bobbed in the choppy harbour water as they fought to stay afloat, calling for help that seemed impossibly far away. This was no longer a sinking boat. It was a race against time, and time was running out fast. Captain Rodriguez's hands flew over the radio controls as the Pacific Explorer continued its deadly descent into San Diego Harbor. His voice, steady despite the chaos around him, cut through the emergency frequency with words that would set a rescue operation into motion. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is the Pacific Explorer in San Diego Harbor. We have collided with another vessel and are taking on water rapidly. 43 souls on board, repeat, 43 souls on board. We are sinking fast and need immediate assistance. Multiple passengers in the water." The message reached the San Diego Fire Rescue Department's Emergency Operations Center within seconds. Dispatcher Jennifer Walsh, a 20-year veteran who had handled countless emergency calls, felt her pulse quicken as she heard the desperation in the captain's voice. This wasn't a routine call. This was a mass casualty incident in the making. "Copy. Pacific Explorer. This is San Diego Fire Rescue. Can you confirm your exact location?" Walsh's fingers were already flying over her keyboard, alerting multiple agencies simultaneously. "We're approximately 200 yards southwest of the Embarcadero, near the Coronado ferry route. The boat is listing severely to starboard. We have passengers in the water and more going over every minute. We need water rescue units now." Within the first minute of receiving the call, Walsh had dispatched every available resource. Fire stations across the city received the alert. Harbor patrol boats changed course toward the scene. And most critically, the call went out to the water rescue unit stationed at the Fire Rescue Air Operations Facility. Lieutenant Michael Chen was conducting equipment checks on his dive gear when the alarm pierced the morning air. A 12-year veteran of the Water Rescue Unit, Chen had seen it all. But as he listened to the details crackling over the radio, he knew this would be different. 43 people in the water was beyond anything they'd trained for as a standard scenario. "This is Water Rescue Unit responding," Chen radioed back as he and his team sprinted toward their helicopter. "ETA 4 minutes to scene, requesting additional air support and harbor patrol vessels for victim recovery." The Pacific Explorer's Mayday had triggered the largest water rescue response in San Diego Harbor's recent history. The red and white helicopter of the San Diego Fire Rescue Department lifted off from Montgomery Field with a thunderous roar, its rotors cutting through the morning air as it banked sharply toward the harbor. Lieutenant Michael Chen sat beside pilot Sarah Martinez, both scanning the horizon for their first glimpse of the emergency scene, while two other water rescue specialists, Rodriguez and Thompson, prepared their equipment in the back. From 500 feet above, the scope of the disaster became immediately clear. The Pacific Explorer was now listing at a severe angle, its white hull half submerged as passengers clung to the upper railings. Dozens of heads dotted the water around the sinking vessel, some wearing bright orange life jackets, others struggling to stay afloat without any flotation device. The scene looked like scattered confetti on the dark blue surface of the harbor. "Jesus," Pilot Martinez whispered into her headset. "There are people everywhere." Chen studied the water conditions through his visor. The harbor was choppy from boat traffic and the morning breeze, making visibility challenging for anyone in the water. Worse, he could see that panic was causing people to cluster together, making individual rescues more complicated. Some passengers were still jumping or falling from the tilting boat, adding to the chaos below. "Harbor patrol boats are en route, but still 5 minutes out," came the voice of the dispatcher through their radio. "You're the first responders on scene. How do you want to proceed? Chen's mind raced through their training scenarios. Standard protocol was to insert one diver at a time for single victim rescues, but this situation demanded a different approach. They had multiple people in immediate danger, and the sinking boat was creating a debris field that would make helicopter operations increasingly dangerous. "We're going to have to put 2 divers in the water simultaneously," Chen decided, his voice calm but urgent. "Martinez, can you hold us steady at 30 feet? The boat's mast is still above water, so we need to be careful about positioning." "Roger that, Lieutenant." "I'll hold her as steady as I can, but the rotor wash is going to make things choppy down there." Rodriguez and Thompson were already suited up in their full rescue gear: neoprene wetsuits, helmets with communication systems, rescue harnesses, and emergency flotation devices. Each carried enough equipment to assist multiple victims, but they both knew that in a situation like this, equipment was only as good as the courage and skill of the person using it. The helicopter moved into position above the disaster zone, and Chen felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before every water rescue. But this time was different. This time, 43 lives were counting on them to be perfect. Lieutenant Chen stood at the helicopter's open door, 30 feet above the churning waters of San Diego Harbor, as the chaos below came into sharp focus. The Pacific Explorer was now almost completely on its side, passengers still clinging to the upper railings, while others floated in the water, some calling for help, others ominously silent. "On my mark," Chen spoke into his radio, his eyes fixed on the water below. The helicopter's rotor wash was creating additional turbulence, but pilot Martinez held the aircraft as steady as humanly possible. "Rodriguez, you take the cluster of passengers near the bow. Thompson, head for the family group about 50 meters to starboard. I'm going for the elderly man who just went under near the stern." Without hesitation, Chen leapt from the helicopter, his body cutting through the air in a perfect entry dive. The shock of the cold Pacific water hit him instantly, but his training kicked in as he surfaced and oriented himself toward his first victim. Rodriguez and Thompson hit the water moments later, their entries creating massive splashes that sent waves radiating outward. The water was more chaotic than it had appeared from above. Debris from the collision floated everywhere: seat cushions, pieces of the boat's interior, personal belongings of passengers. The current was stronger than expected, pulling everything toward the marina breakwater. Chen fought against the water's pull as he swam toward the elderly passenger he'd seen go under. The man surfaced just as Chen reached him, coughing and gasping, his face pale with exhaustion and fear. He had no life jacket, and his strength was clearly failing. Chen immediately deployed his rescue buoy, a bright yellow flotation device that would keep them both above water. "Sir, I'm Lieutenant Chen with San Diego Fire Rescue. I've got you now." "Just relax and let me do the work," Chen said, his voice calm and reassuring despite the urgent situation. The man's eyes, wide with terror moments before, began to focus as the rescue buoy supported his weight. 50 meters away, Rodriguez had reached a group of 3 passengers who were trying to help each other stay afloat. A teenage girl was supporting her younger brother, while their father struggled with an improperly fitted life jacket. Rodriguez quickly assessed the situation. The father was the most immediate concern, as his life jacket was actually pulling him face down in the water. Thompson, meanwhile, had located the young mother, Sarah, and her daughter, Emma. The 6-year-old was crying and clinging to her mother, who was barely managing to keep both of them above water. Thompson's heart clenched as he saw the exhaustion in the woman's eyes. She'd been fighting the water for several minutes and wouldn't last much longer. "Ma'am, I'm here to help," Thompson called out as he approached. "I'm going to take your daughter first, then come back for you." But Sarah shook her head frantically. "No, don't separate us. Please don't take her away from me." Thompson understood her fear, but he also knew that trying to rescue both simultaneously in these conditions could endanger all 3 of them. The helicopter hovered overhead, its crew already preparing rescue lines for the first group of survivors. The first rescue lifted from the water with mechanical precision that belied the emotional weight of the moment. Lieutenant Chen had secured the elderly passenger in the rescue harness, and now both men were being hoisted toward the helicopter's open door. The man, whose name Chen had learned was Walter, gripped the rescue line with white knuckles as they rose above the chaos below. "Almost there, Walter. You're safe now," Chen shouted over the rotor noise, his own relief evident as they reached the helicopter. The crew chief pulled them both inside, immediately wrapping the survivor in thermal blankets while Chen prepared to go back down. Below, Rodriguez had successfully separated the teenage girl and her brother from their father, who was now floating safely with a properly adjusted life jacket. The rescue swimmer made the difficult decision to send the children up first, their smaller size and obvious exhaustion making them the priority. The girl, maybe 16 years old, held her brother's hand as they were lifted together in a dual rescue harness. "Tell my dad we're okay," she called down to Rodriguez as they rose toward the helicopter. Her maturity in the face of terror reminded him why he'd chosen this job. These weren't just statistics or training scenarios. They were real people with families, dreams, and futures that depended on his actions in the next few minutes. Thompson faced a more complex situation with Sarah and Emma. The mother had become increasingly panicked, refusing to let her daughter be rescued separately. The little girl was crying and shivering, her small body struggling against the cold water and the oversized life jacket that kept slipping. "Sarah, that's your name, right?" Thompson said, using the calm, authoritative tone he'd perfected over years of rescues. "I understand you're scared, but Emma needs to get warm and dry right now. I promise you, I will not leave this water without you. Do you hear me? I will not leave you behind." Something in his voice, maybe the absolute certainty of his promise, broke through Sarah's panic. She nodded, tears mixing with seawater on her face, as she helped transfer Emma to Thompson's rescue equipment. As the helicopter lifted Emma toward safety, Sarah watched her daughter disappear into the aircraft, then turned back to Thompson. "You promised," she said simply. "I promised," he confirmed, already attaching a rescue line to her life jacket. Meanwhile, new arrivals appeared on the horizon. Harbor patrol boats were racing toward the scene, their engines creating white wakes as they approached. A second fire rescue helicopter was also inbound, its ETA less than 2 minutes. But even with additional help coming, Chen could see that the Pacific Explorer was sinking faster than anticipated. The boat's upper deck, which had been providing refuge for several passengers, was now almost underwater. Time was running out for those still clinging to the vessel. If this story has you hooked so far, subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in their place. Because what comes next would test every limit of human endurance and courage. The harbor's currents had grown stronger and more unpredictable as the sinking Pacific Explorer created underwater obstacles and changed the water flow patterns. What had been a challenging rescue was now becoming a battle against the sea itself. Lieutenant Chen, back in the water for his third rescue attempt, found himself fighting not just to reach the remaining passengers, but to maintain his position as the current tried to pull him toward the rocky breakwater. Chen was focused on a cluster of 4 passengers who had been swept away from the main group. They were older adults, probably in their 60s, and their strength was clearly fading. One woman had lost her life jacket entirely and was being supported by her husband, whose own flotation device was barely keeping him above water. "Hold on! I'm coming to you!" Chen called out, but the wind and waves carried his voice away. He watched with growing alarm as the current pulled the group further from the helicopter's hover point. If they drifted much more, the rescue would become exponentially more dangerous. Rodriguez, meanwhile, was dealing with his own crisis. The teenage boy he'd rescued earlier, the girl's brother, had been successfully lifted to the helicopter, but his father had been swept into the debris field near the sinking boat. The man was conscious and wearing a life jacket, but he was trapped among floating pieces of the Pacific Explorer's interior. Every time he tried to swim clear, another piece of wreckage would block his path or knock him back toward the submerged hull. "Sir, stop trying to swim," Rodriguez shouted as he fought his way through the debris. "Let me come to you." But panic had taken over, and the man continued to struggle against the wreckage, exhausting himself and making the rescue more dangerous for both of them. Thompson was facing the most heartbreaking challenge of all. He had just finished lifting Sarah to safety, keeping his promise to reunite her with Emma, when he spotted something that made his blood run cold. About 30 yards away, partially hidden by the waves, he could see a small figure floating motionlessly. It was a child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing a bright blue shirt that had kept him visible in the choppy water. Thompson's powerful strokes carried him quickly to the boy, his mind racing through the possibilities. The child wasn't moving, but he was floating face up, which was a positive sign. As Thompson reached him, he could see that the boy was conscious but in shock, his lips blue from the cold water and his eyes unfocused. "Hey, buddy, I'm here to help," Thompson said gently, immediately deploying his rescue buoy to support them both. "What's your name?" Jamie," the boy whispered through chattering teeth. "I can't find my grandma. She was holding my hand, but then the boat tipped and I couldn't see her anymore." Thompson's heart sank as he scanned the water around them. Somewhere in this chaos was an elderly woman, Jamie's grandmother, who had likely been separated during the initial panic. She could be anywhere, already rescued, still clinging to debris or worse, somewhere beneath the surface. The second rescue helicopter had now arrived on scene, and its crew was working to extract the passengers Chen had reached. But even with 2 aircraft and additional harbor patrol boats, the math was becoming clear. They had started with 43 people on the Pacific Explorer. So far, they had confirmed rescues of maybe 20 passengers. That left over 20 people still unaccounted for, and the Pacific Explorer was now completely underwater except for a small section of its upper superstructure. The Pacific Explorer's final moments above water were a race against physics and time. Lieutenant Chen could see the last few passengers clinging to the boat's uppermost railings as the vessel made its final descent into San Diego Harbor. These were the people who had managed to climb highest when the boat first started sinking, but now their refuge was disappearing beneath the waves. A middle-aged man in a red polo shirt was holding onto the boat's radio antenna, the highest point still above water. Below him, 2 women clung to a railing that was already partially submerged. Every wave that crashed over them pushed them closer to losing their grip and going under with the boat. Chen made a decision that went against standard protocol. Instead of waiting for the helicopter to lower him a rescue line, he swam directly to the sinking vessel, knowing that seconds counted more than safety procedures. The boat's superstructure was creating a dangerous undertow as it sank, and anyone still attached to it would be pulled down. "Let go of the boat," Chen yelled to the man in the red shirt. "Swim away from it now." But the passenger was terrified of releasing his grip, afraid he would drown without something solid to hold on to. Chen realized he would have to physically remove the man from the sinking vessel. He grabbed the passenger around the waist and pulled him away from the antenna just as that section of the boat disappeared beneath the surface. The 2 women below had a different problem. The railing they were holding was now underwater, and they were essentially holding their breath while maintaining their grip. Chen could see air bubbles rising from their positions. They were trying to surface, but couldn't let go of what they perceived as safety. Rodriguez had managed to free the trapped passenger from the debris field and was now swimming both of them toward a rescue line from the first helicopter. but he could see Chen's situation and knew his lieutenant was in trouble. The sinking boat was creating a whirlpool effect, and Chen was fighting against the suction while trying to rescue 3 people simultaneously. "Thompson, we need help at the boat," Rodriguez called into his radio. "Chen's got multiple victims going down with the wreck." Thompson, who had just secured young Jamie in a rescue harness and was about to be lifted up with the boy, made an instant decision. "Take the kid up," he told the helicopter crew. "I'm staying down for the boat victims." As Jamie was lifted to safety, Thompson dove beneath the surface to reach the 2 women who were still clinging to the submerged railing. The water was murky and cold, filled with debris and air bubbles from the sinking vessel. Thompson's powerful strokes carried him down to where he could see the women's shapes against the boat's white hull. The first woman, seeing Thompson approaching underwater, finally released her grip and swam toward him. But the second woman, an elderly passenger, seemed unable to let go. Thompson realized she might be unconscious or so panicked that she couldn't make the decision to release the railing. With his lungs burning, Thompson grabbed the elderly woman and physically pried her hands from the railing. Together, they shot toward the surface, Thompson's training and conditioning keeping him calm even as his body screamed for oxygen. They broke the surface just as Lieutenant Chen was securing the man in the red shirt to a rescue line. The Pacific Explorer's final section disappeared beneath the waves with a sound like thunder, leaving only scattered debris and the rescue team's equipment floating on the surface. But Thompson's relief was short-lived. As he treaded water with the elderly woman, he realized she wasn't breathing. Thompson cradled the elderly woman in the rescue position as the helicopter's rescue line descended toward them. She was unconscious and not breathing, her skin pale and cold from the extended time in the water. Every second counted now. This wasn't just a water rescue anymore, it was a medical emergency. "I need immediate lift," Thompson called into his radio. "Elderly female, not breathing, possible drowning victim." The helicopter crew worked with precision born from hundreds of training exercises, but this felt different. As Thompson and the woman were hoisted from the water, he could see the urgency in everyone's movements. The aircraft's crew chief immediately began rescue breathing as they rose toward the open door. Inside the helicopter, paramedic Lisa Santos took over the woman's care. Santos had been flying with the Water Rescue Unit for 8 years, and her medical training had saved lives in situations just like this. She cleared the woman's airway, checking for obstructions while continuing rescue breathing. "Come on, Mrs." Santos checked the woman's ID bracelet. "Come on, Mrs. Patterson. Stay with us." Below, Chen and Rodriguez were conducting a final sweep of the area where the Pacific Explorer had sunk. They had accounted for most of the passengers, but Chen's mental count was telling him they were still missing people. The boat's manifest listed 43 passengers and crew, and they had rescued 38 individuals. 5 people were still unaccounted for. "Harbor Patrol reports they've recovered 4 additional passengers," came the voice of the operations coordinator through their radios. "That brings us to 42 confirmed rescues or recoveries." Chen felt his heart sink. One person was still missing, and the boat was now completely underwater. He dove beneath the surface, scanning the murky water for any sign of the missing passenger. The harbor floor was only about 40 feet down at this location, and visibility was poor due to stirred-up sediment from the sinking. Rodriguez joined the search, and together they systematically covered the area around the wreck site. Time was critical. If someone was trapped underwater, they had only minutes before it would be too late. Then Chen saw something that made his pulse race. About 30 feet down, near what remained of the Pacific Explorer's wheelhouse, he could see a flash of bright yellow. It was a life jacket, but more importantly, there was someone wearing it. Chen dove deeper, his powerful strokes carrying him down toward the trapped passenger. It was a young woman, maybe in her 20s, and she appeared to be caught on something near the boat's superstructure. Her eyes were closed, but Chen could see air bubbles still coming from her mouth. She was alive, but barely. Working quickly, Chen freed the woman from the twisted metal that had trapped her life jacket. Her body was limp as he began the ascent, but he could feel her pulse when he checked her wrist. The surface seemed impossibly far away as his lungs burned for oxygen, but Chen's training and determination drove him upward. They broke the surface together, Chen gasping for air while the woman remained unconscious in his arms. "I've got her," he called to Rodriguez. "Number 43, she's alive." The rescue line came down immediately, and within minutes the last passenger from the Pacific Explorer was being lifted toward the helicopter and medical care. In the aircraft, Mrs. Patterson suddenly gasped and began coughing up seawater. Her eyes opened, confused and frightened, but she was breathing on her own. Santos smiled as she adjusted the oxygen mask over the elderly woman's face. "Welcome back, Mrs. Patterson. You're safe now." The San Diego Fire Rescue Department's Operations Center buzzed with controlled intensity as dispatchers coordinated the massive response to the Pacific Explorer incident. On the harbor, the scene had transformed from chaos to organized recovery. 4 helicopters now worked the area, 2 harbor patrol boats had established a security perimeter, and emergency medical teams waited on the shore to receive the rescued passengers. Lieutenant Chen treaded water near the spot where the Pacific Explorer had disappeared beneath the waves, conducting one final visual sweep of the area. The debris field had spread across several hundred yards, but his trained eyes saw no signs of additional passengers. Rodriguez and Thompson flanked him, equally exhausted but maintaining their vigilance until the very last moment. "Water Rescue Unit, this is Operations Command," came the voice through their radios. "Confirm passenger count and status." Chen took a breath before responding, knowing that his next words would either confirm a miracle or reveal a tragedy. "Operations, this is Lieutenant Chen. We have visual confirmation of 0 passengers remaining in the water. All 43 souls from the Pacific Explorer have been accounted for. Repeat, all 43 are accounted for." A brief silence followed, then the voice of Commander Walsh, who had been coordinating the entire operation. "Outstanding work, Water Rescue Unit. Harbor Patrol will handle debris cleanup and investigation. You're cleared to return to base." As the 3 rescue swimmers were hoisted up to their helicopter for the final time that day, Chen could see the results of their work spread across the harbor. Emergency vehicles lined the shore, their red and blue lights creating a kaleidoscope of color against the morning sun. Ambulances were transporting the most serious cases to local hospitals, while less severely affected passengers were being treated at a triage center set up in the nearby marina. Young Emma was wrapped in a blanket, sitting next to her mother Sarah in the back of an ambulance. Despite everything they had been through, the little girl was pointing at the helicopters and asking her mother about the flying doctors who had saved them. Walter, the elderly man who had been Chen's first rescue, was giving a statement to investigators while paramedics checked his vitals one more time. Jamie had been reunited with his grandmother, the Mrs. Patterson, who Thompson had pulled from the submerged boat. She was being kept overnight for observation, but her doctor expected a full recovery. The boy hadn't left her bedside, holding her hand and telling her about the underwater policeman who had saved them both. At the hospital, the passenger who had been the last rescued was conscious and stable. Her name was Rebecca Martinez, a marine biology student who had been taking the harbor tour to study local sea life. Ironically, she had ended up becoming part of the marine environment herself, but the skill of the Water Rescue Unit had given her a second chance at the life she loved. As their helicopter banked toward Montgomery Field, Chen looked back at San Diego Harbor one more time. The water had returned to its normal deep blue color, with only scattered Coast Guard vessels marking where the Pacific Explorer had met its end. To anyone who hadn't witnessed the morning's events, the harbor looked peaceful, normal. But Chen knew that 43 families would forever remember this day differently. 43 people had faced the possibility of drowning in those waters, and 43 people had been pulled back from that edge by the courage and training of emergency responders who had sworn to protect life. Rodriguez, exhausted but satisfied, broke the silence in the helicopter. "Lieutenant, in 12 years of doing this job, I've never seen anything like what we just pulled off." Chen nodded, still processing the magnitude of what they had accomplished. "It wasn't just us, Rodriguez. It was the pilots, the harbor patrol, the paramedics, the dispatchers. Everyone did their job perfectly when it mattered most." Thompson, who had been quietly staring out at the water, finally spoke. 43 for 43. Not one person lost." As they approached the landing pad, Chen felt the familiar mix of exhaustion and fulfillment that came after a successful rescue. But this felt different, larger somehow. They had faced a disaster that could have been catastrophic, and through skill, courage, and maybe a little luck, they had prevented it from becoming a tragedy. The San Diego Fire Rescue Department would conduct a thorough investigation of the incident. They would analyze their response times, their procedures, their equipment. They would identify areas for improvement and update their training protocols. But for now, in this moment, 43 people were alive who might not have been, and that was what mattered most. If this story moved you, subscribe, turn on the bell, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because in harbors, in cities, and in communities across America, men and women stand ready to answer the call when courage becomes the only thing standing between life and death. The next mission might be closer than you think.